Good morning. Morning, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
All right. Welcome to Daf Yomi Week in Review, the first week of Tractate Nidarim. How's everybody feeling about vows? It's a thumbs up from Rabbi Moshe Edelman. Yeah. Okay. All right. Feels good to start a new tractate and a new topic. Although this one is an unfamiliar one to many of us, I think. All right, I'm here. I'm Rachel Scheinerman. You're on My Jewish Learning. This is Daf Yomi Week in Review, where we've just gotten through the first week of Tractate Nidarim, and we are joined today by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg to zip us through a review of the last 7 dafim.
All right, good morning, everybody. I am putting in the chat right now. Trying to. There we go. A link to, I'm going to share some slides. I know some people like to have the slides, and I believe the permissions are all there so you can view this document. We're at the beginning of Masechet Nidarim. We're really a week in, but this is our first time together in this space since we started the Masechet. And I wanted us to step back a little bit before we dig into something, because for me, well, I would say there are plenty of sections of the Gemara that we've been through that aren't immediately relevant to my day-to-day Jewish life. Right, in the Masechtot, the tractates about holidays, there was plenty about sacrifices, which we don't do. We've seen already plenty of agricultural sections, and being not a farmer, those aren't directly relevant to me so much either. But there's something about this tractate that on its surface felt like this is far away from what my Jewish living is about, because I'm not in the practice of making vows all the time. And in fact, as was pointed out in the introduction to the Masechet, if you get the daily emails, right, we're not in that practice of making vows all the time. And actually on Yom Kippur, we come together and we nullify all the vows we're going to make in the new year to sort of make it in some way so that this whole Masechet is moot, because if we nullify promissory language in advance, so none of it takes hold, we don't have to worry about all the details of this Masechet. Which then made me think about, like, what are we learning here? What's relevant? How does this apply to our Jewish life? And I thought I might open with that question and put that out to you, and jot a couple words into the chat. How does what we're talking about in Masechet Nidarim so far, week number 1, relate in terms of your own Jewish living and Jewish practice? What do you think?
Probably Rabbi Goldberg, people who need a few minutes to think about that and pop answers into the chat. Yeah. I need a few minutes to think about that.
Oh, there you go. All right. That's true. That's very fair. All right. Rob Blass says, I vow never to vow. Very good. So I'm already some wordplay, right? What came to mind for me is, I don't know, there are all those memes, on the internet, like, let's eat kids, or let's eat, kids. And it's like punctuation saves lives, because that comma means we're inviting the kids to eat instead of we're eating the kids. And there's a way in which some of the language, of vows here really, really, really matters to people, in the language. It means a lot. So I see things about being careful about our words. Susan says, I would get back to this after missing several weeks. Does that count as a vow? Oh, saying I would get back to this. This isn't clear after, right? So we make commitments in our own life. And Susan's saying maybe this has to do with the commitments that we make.
There's a Jewish verbal tick, bli neder, right? Maybe you have heard this in certain Jewish communities. It's very common. People say things like, bli neder, I will do the laundry today, or, whatever. And bli neder actually literally means without a vow, because we are trying to distinguish our language and make sure that we've made it clear we are not vowing to do the laundry. That would be too strong a commitment, because then if we fail to do the laundry, we have committed a transgression. So there's actually, there's a lot of Jewish communities where I hear this said a lot. People say bli neder when they promise something, which I always thought originally meant just I'm promising to do this, but it actually means I don't promise I'm going to do this.
Right. I wonder if with the numbers of people studying Daf Yomi right now, if Bli Neder will make a, we'll make a more of a comeback as we're a little more sensitive to this. I do want to refer to right in the opening pages. The Gemara is talking about some technical issues. Is if you substitute words that aren't the formal language in vows or oaths, does that count? If you imply or intimate, which is what the word the Steinsaltz uses, something that seems promissory is not the clearest language, does that count or not? And there's some technical pieces there about the phraseology that someone makes when they make a promise or make a commitment. And while there's a lot we can dig into there, I was really interested in the other areas of Jewish living that the rabbis brought up where this might come into play, which happens in these pages. I just want to list them. The Gemara's conversation is technical about the specific words when you intimate. But I thought it was interesting to see how the rabbis thought, like, where does this apply? So in the pages we've read this week, they spent some time on engagement, right? Do we have to make clear statements when we set up an engagement between two people to be married? The rabbis also talk about the mitzvah of peah, the fact that you have to designate the corners of your field to give to the poor and not to harvest them and to leave those for others. That designation is something that the rabbis think about as it matters how clear you are when you designate that. Similarly with giving charity, when you pledge to give money to others or to the temple, right, to an institution or to others, that designation matters. Also, when making something ownerless, if I own something and I don't want it anymore, like my statement of making it ownerless, the rabbis want us to take care with, and we will get into that when we get into civil law soon. We'll spend a number of years there about things that people make ownerless. But if I own something and say, no, I don't want it anymore, you can have it, right? The rabbis want us to have the same clarity about ownership as they do about vows. And the last theme that I saw that they pulled out and talked about was the designation of where the bathroom is going to be. I think that has a practical implication and social contract also. Like I would think about that. We think about that civilly these days when we decide where we're going to build places where garbage dumps. Thinking about, right, there's a social contract. If we're going to leave refuse in certain places, we want to agree to where that is and be very clear about it, because those are places where a miscue on one person's part or not being clear on one person's part can make things really uncomfortable for other people in the community. So I was thinking about all of those things as I started to think about where does this apply to our own lives today, and some of these things it matters. I think what stood out from that list that I just gave is charity. But as someone who's worked in Jewish nonprofits and someone who donates to Jewish nonprofits, I think a lot about when I make a commitment, what that means to really make that commitment and follow through with it. And then I know from working on the other side of the table, when you're in a Jewish institution and someone makes a commitment of charity to you, you want to be really careful that you identify the terms so that you don't have a misunderstanding down the road, because a misunderstanding about donation can the relationship can go wrong, and the relationship is more important than sometimes than the gift itself. You want to preserve that relationship. So I bring all this into the introduction to say to you all that maybe for you, like for me, some of this material feels much further from day-to-day Jewish living than other topics of other Masechtot. But some of the challenge that's on us is to look for, how does this apply? Where are the areas of Jewish life where that fits in, and how does this apply? And the texts I'd love for us to look at today are something that I think applies to all of us in this room. And David just noted it in the chat. That comes from, it's the last line on page 7b and the beginning of page 8. So I'm going to share my screen and bring it to another area, and you will see the connection to our lives, I hope, instantaneously, or at least by slide 2 or 3. So Rav Gidel teaches that Rav said, from where is it derived that one may take an oath to fulfill a mitzvah? Right? Whereas the question that they're asking, that Rav is asking, he's going to answer is, how do I know I can take an oath to do something that I'm religiously obligated to do? And this comes up in the context of a conversation about, can you stack oaths, right? In part, like if I make an oath, can I make another oath for the same thing? Can I make a vow for another thing? That's been the theme of the conversation. But also here, the question is like, if I'm ready or obligated to do something because it's a mitzvah, it's a commandment, can I make an oath to do it? So Rav quotes from a verse from the Psalms, from Tehillim, that says, I've sworn and I've confirmed it to observe your righteous ordinances. Right? The psalmist in one of the religious poems here in the Psalm says, I made an oath and I confirmed it that I'm going to do the mitzvot. And so if the psalmist hints that you can do it, that's a hint, says Rav, that you can take an oath to say you're going to do something that's already a religious obligation. The Gemara has an objection to that. It says, isn't one already under oath from when each Jew took an oath at Mount Sinai to fulfill all the mitzvot? If you're familiar with the midrashim that the rabbis bring about what happens at Mount Sinai and the text in the Torah, right? There's a sense that, or at least a rabbinic understanding that at Mount Sinai, when the Jews said "Naseh v'nishma," we're gonna do what we hear. That they obligated themselves with oath level obligations to fulfill the mitzvot. So it seems silly to say you can make an oath to do the mitzvot, because technically, either if you live in that midrash that says we were all at Sinai, that we all made it ourselves, or if you live in the midrash that says that our ancestors made an oath that's binding upon us, either way, this ancient Israelite oath to keep the mitzvot falls on us. So why is it that we should be able to take another oath to say we should do a mitzvot? So what does Rav teach about this? Rather, the teaching is this: it's permitted for a person to motivate themselves to fulfill the mitzvot in this manner, although this oath is not technically valid. So if I make an oath to do a mitzvah, it doesn't obligate me to do the mitzvah because I'm already obligated. It's not technically the formal language that makes for a valid oath. But Rav here says it's okay for people to do this because this motivates it to do that. So I don't know if you're in this category, but right now, I'm looking out my window and I see the sukkah that I've pledged to take down. I haven't taken that down yet, but taking down your sukkah isn't a mitzvah, but it makes me think of all the people who are saying next year we're gonna build a sukkah. And while the obligation from the rabbinic perspective falls on all of us to build a sukkah on Sukkot, right? Sometimes we need that extra motivation that says, we ate all these great meals and all these friends sukkah. Next year, we're going to build a sukkah. And while we could use oath language to make that commitment, technically, we're not making an oath because the obligation exists, but it is motivating for people to take on new obligations. We have another statement that Rav Gidel brings. Rav Gidel says that Rav says, one who says, I will rise early, excuse me, and study this chapter, or I will study this tractate, as taking a great vow to the God of Israel. So here, not about a particular ritual mitzvot, but this statement is about if I make a statement out loud that I'm going to study a particular chapter of Tanakh or of the Bible, or a particular tractate of Gemara, or perhaps Rav is talking about just the Mishnah because Gemara didn't yet exist for him. That has oath level commitment to God if you make that commitment to study. But the Gemara asks, isn't he not already under oath due to the general obligation to study Torah? Similar question to what we saw above. Right, an oath doesn't take effect upon a pre-existing oath. So if we're committed to studying Torah, how is it we can take an oath to study Torah? And it says, what's this teaching us? The Gemara says, if one claims that Rav Gidel is teaching that such a vow may be made, even merely to motivate oneself to study, this would be the same as the first statement of Rav Gidel, right? If we take this statement to mean that, just like for other mitzvot, you can commit yourself by making an oath, even though it's not technically an oath, that could be what this means here too. But the Gemara is applying, Gemara procedure to the teachings of Rav Gidol, quoting Rav, saying, we already learned that in the last statement, so what could it mean here? The Gemara brings something new. Well, it teaches us that if one desires, right, if you want to, you can exempt yourself from studying Torah when you say the Shema in the morning or the evening, right? In our liturgy, we say the Shema twice a day, in the morning and the evening, and since the Shema is verses that come from the Torah, the rabbis count saying the Shema as part of a prayer service as also studying Torah. And since you can commit yourself to study Torah just by to fulfill it just by praying, this teaching is saying when you make an oath to say you're going to study a particular chapter or a particular masachet, that commitment is above and beyond like this easy thing that's built into our rituals that says just say the Shema and you can check off the box for studying Torah this day. If you don't want that to be your Torah study, you can make an additional commitment to other words of Torah. Another statement of Rav Gidol, quoting Rav Gidol said that Rav said, with regard to one who says to another, let us rise early and study this chapter, it's incumbent upon the invitee to rise early and be the first to arrive. So if you send an email or a text or however you communicate with your Daf Yomi Chavruta, hey, let's get up early tomorrow morning and get a jump on the daf. You've made the commitment to be there first, right? If you invite the other person to study, you should show up before they do. And why is that? There's an allusion to that in a verse from Ezekiel. I love that they apply this verse to this context. Ezekiel says, God said to me, arise and go forth to the plain, and there I will speak to you. So God, right, if Ezekiel has a vision, God says, go out to the plain and I will give you my message that you'll later give on to the people. And Ezekiel says, I rose and went forth to the plain, and behold, when I got there, the glory of God stood there. So God invited Ezekiel for a chavruta, and Ezekiel got up to go, but God got there first.
Rabbi Goldberg, I like to think that this is what we do at MJL, right? We invite everybody to be our chavruta and studying Talmud, and we try and we get it out 5 a.m. on our time. We don't rise early. We schedule it the day before, but you know, that's the magic of email scheduling.
That is true. Although I would say part of what made me nervous about these quotes, which I really like to come, is, Rachel, as my editor, I know I make lots of commitments about when I send you those pieces in advance for them to be edited. And I'm very conscious as we're in Nidarim about established deadlines and how I and my fellow writers need to stick to them to make our lives early, to make our lives easy and get those in early. So I felt a little risky and humbled in front of my editor bringing up these texts. I'm going to stop the share for a moment. Those are the texts that I brought, and what struck me about these texts, in terms of the question I put out at the beginning about what does this have to do with our lives today? Here's a place where maybe it does. We've all, on some level, made some commitment to study Talmud this year or these 7 years. It might be that you come to this week in review. It might be that you're a reader of the daily emails from My Jewish Learning. You might be attending podcasts, have a chavruta, right? There are all these routes that we're going through My Jewish Learning. And I guess my question for us is it helpful to think of those commitments as a at vow or oath level, right? Are the texts that we're reading speaking to us about the commitments we've made to ourselves, to God, to our study partners, to study Talmud this year? And I'm wondering if that's resonating for anybody here on the Zoom. And if so, let me know. Put it in the chat. Let's see what you have to say.
Well, people are thinking, I will say I was struck by the text that said we are already all obligated in Torah study. We've all been obligated since Sinai. And so in some ways, it's not really a choice for us, according to what the rabbis think, not that Daf Yomi is the way you need to do it, but that they view all Jews as being obligated in studying their sacred texts.
Yes. Although that's,
of course, there are many ways to do that are not Daf Yomi, and so many ways to do that, including, they tell us, just reciting Shema twice a day. That will fulfill your obligation.
And actually, in the not only saying Shema, but early on in the Siddur, for people who like to go first thing to the initial blessings at the beginning of a morning service, or people who don't go, who want to know what's happening while we're still sleeping. One of the first blessings we say is a blessing for Torah study, and then there are verses and selections from rabbinic texts in the Siddur. So on some level, the rabbis and the editors of the Siddur have made it easy for us to fulfill the obligation of studying Torah by providing us both a ritual opportunity to say a blessing first thing every morning and to check off that box. I know in my own life, the commitment for Daf Yomi is a little more than just that easy box checkoff that says I go into shul and say the blessing for studying Torah and read the text that's there in the Siddur. Or the Siddur that I use has some options, so it's not the same every day. But this commitment to study the Talmud over 7 years feels like a different level of obligation. And some days it's the obligation that pushes me to do it more than the desire.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this before, but I was a Daf Yomi dropout in the last cycle pretty early. I think I made it not quite through brachot, which is the first 60 pages, so pretty early. It was overwhelming. It was too hard. I couldn't do it. And to some degree, the way I wanted to do it this cycle and the way I have made myself do it is by making a commitment to all of you, to the authors and to the readers, that I'm going to get a piece out every day about it. And that if I didn't have that commitment, I think I'd probably be a Daf Yomi dropout a second time. I have to be honest.
Yeah. Well,
you've got some comments now in the chat, Rabbi Goldberg. Do you want me to read them for you? You want to take a look at them?
Yeah, I'll take a look. I just want to respond to what you said, because as I'm trying to find a connection to the Masechet, what you just said makes sense, because I feel that as I have a editorial deadline coming for submitting a piece for the Daf Yomi, part of what motivates me to do it is this commitment to get it in on time. Part of it, right? I'm enjoying it. I like the writing, but right, it's the promise, it's the commitment, like you said, right, that I made to you as the editor, that my Jewish Learning has made to everybody to get this out. That's motivating for people. And while we might not be making vows about what we're going to bring to the temple or not, right? There's some of the examples that are in Masechet Nedarim, right? I don't know anyone who's ever made a Nazirite vow, and we're reading a lot about Nazirite vows, and which sometimes is odd because we're going to have a whole Masechet about that next, which might repeat some of those passages. But what I look for as the through line is, here are people stepping up to make a commitment they don't have, and either Torah or the rabbis or they themselves or the community is holding them to that, and we experience those sorts of commitments in our lives too. All right, I want to look at the text. Stephen Lamb points to one of the toughest biblical examples. Yiftach makes a vow. Yiftach is one of the shoftim, one of the judges, a military commander who in pre-monarchy Israel in the biblical narrative is a leader of the people for a while, but he goes off to war to fight the invading enemy, and he makes a vow to God, whoever comes out my door to greet me when I come back victorious from the war, I will offer up as a sacrifice. And if you know that story, he comes back home and his daughter walks out the door. And as the Bible tells it, he sacrifices his daughter. It's a really tough story to read. It's one that challenges this notion of, like, do we always keep vows no matter what, or when should we break them? And I'm not sure I land where the Tanakh landed. And there's a lot of commentary about judging him. It's a rich story, and
if I remember correctly, his daughter also wants him to do it. She doesn't want him to break his vow.
Yes.
Which adds to the emotional impact of the whole thing, I think.
Yes. So Philip asked, am I saying that a commitment is the same as a vow? I'm not. I think commitment is a more general language and vow is a particular language. But as we look at vows and oaths and legal contracts, like a lot of while vows are the title subject of this Masachet. We've seen the rabbis talk about different levels of commitments. They're not all vows, but they all carry a certain commitment. And while on the technical level, as I think it begins next week, in the next few pages, we're going to look at here's what a vow is like, and here's what an oath is like, and here's how they're different, right? The legislation, the rules are sometimes different, but the through line is the rabbis want us to take seriously verbal commitments we make to God and to each other. So all commitments are not vows. All vows have some level of commitment. And I think for me, the message of this Masachet that is salient is what does it mean to make a commitment to self, to others, to institutions, to God, and what's our level of obligation, and how can we find guidance in this Masachet from the rabbis in our day where our context is very different. So some of the examples might not relate, but the ethics to be true to one's word and to meet our commitments, that carries through. And as I get ready for the next 3 months of this Masachet, that's some of what's going to be in my head to try to find how to apply this today.
That's right. There is definitely a difference between a commitment and a really formal vow, as discussed in this tractate. And a formal vow brings God on board as a partner, as MJ's iPad is reminding us in the text, that we shouldn't blur the lines, that the rabbis are really want to be actually really clear on where the lines are, because once you go over into vow territory, abrogating it is a whole nother level of transgression than transgressing an ordinary commitment. Though they seem also clearly inspired by the idea of these strong commitments, including the Nazirite one. And we do have one example here, Rabbi Goldberg, in the chat. And there's another in the MJL article on Nazir about modern day Nazirites. It does occasionally happen. So Dr. Irene Lancaster is mentioning that she has a friend who from Haifa, who is a Nazirite from birth and changed his mind as a teenager, which is interesting because, of course, to end a Nazirite vow, you have to come to the temple and make certain sacrifices. So to fully end a Nazirite vow, according to how the Torah says, and the rabbis think you need to, you would need a temple. And so we have an example in our article of somebody who chose to be a Nazirite. It sounds like this person didn't make the choice for themselves, who chose to be a Nazirite and then was for a lifetime because he couldn't undo it in his understanding of the text. I'll pop that article into the chat.
Yeah, right. That's another thing to think of, what our actual modern day example, not right. I was speaking more generally, how can I use these texts to think about pledges, commitments, whether vows or lesser levels of commitment. But I know I have a cousin who lives in Israel, made a vow from his position of Zionism and connecting to Israel, made a vow, I will never leave the land of Israel. Like his siblings started to go on vacation in Europe and other places. And he said, I live in Israel. I take a vow, I'm never leaving Israel. I'm just going to live my life here. And then lo and behold, years later, his daughter and her husband went to become shlichim. They went to serve the Jewish community of Toronto for 2 years. And he was about to have his first grandchild and had to go to his rabbi to say, Rabbi, I made this vow to never leave the land of Israel. And I'm serious about it, but like, I want to be at the bris of my grandson. And as we'll see later, there are ways in which vows can be nullified. His rabbi was able to nullify his vow for him, and he successfully traveled to Toronto, was at the bris, went back. I don't think he's left the land ever before. So there are more, I guess, there are contemporary cases that apply these rules more tightly. What I think about is for many of us who might not be in the category of Nazir from birth or having made such a vow, like my cousin, that thinking about the general through lines between what's the connection here between that and our lives could be a meaningful framing question for as we read forward.
Yeah, so interesting.
Right.
And it makes me think about what it must, how it must feel good to make a vow. I'm thinking about did you say it was a cousin?
Yes.
Your cousin. And I'm imagining the emotion that went into it and the way he felt making that vow and the meaning it might have brought to his life, even if it had unforeseen consequences. And I suspect that's partly behind the rabbi's overall discouragement of vowing, right? Is that these vows are so impactful and it's hard, and maybe the story of Jephthah Yiftach from Judges is in the back of their minds, these unintended consequences of these powerful, divinely backed commitments can be really complicated and difficult.
Yes. Sometimes it's the unintended consequences that get you out of it for the rabbis. We'll see more about that later. But there is a power. Look, I don't want to overcommit minutes to this, but my cousin's statement of, okay, brothers and sisters, you can go vacation in Europe and travel around the world. I live in Israel and I'm staying here, every day of my life. That was a identity statement of his and a commitment about how he was going to live his life Jewishly, until he had a grandchild that was being born on a temporary, 2-year leave to Toronto that his, daughter and her husband had. Anyways, thanks everybody. I hope this kicks off Nedarim strongly for you. And,
thank you all for being with us. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for helping us think through how this might have felt, how this might have operated. Being able to try and immerse ourselves in that a little bit, I think, is always valuable, as is trying to understand how it might function in our own lives. Because of course, these are not just historical curiosities. These are living religious texts for so many of us. So thank you, everybody. It was great to see you. And we will see you tomorrow morning in your inbox and in this space again in 1 week. Have a great week. Bye, everyone.
Hey, everybody.